Cry of Fear is very much not a chill game. In fact, it's one of the more intense horror games I've played in recent memory. Today, we're going to break it down and cover it in a way that minimizes all of that. Whether you find it too intense to play on your own, or you like to drift off to sleep to the sound of chill conversation about video games, I've got you covered. What exactly does this mean? Cry of Fear can definitely be a tense game, with a lot of scares, screams, and very uncomfortable audio. These will be rarely included, and when they are, will be lowered by a large amount to remove the jump scare potential. Nothing will be included to startle the viewer or otherwise for scare or shock value. What we won't be removing, however, is the sensitive and disturbing material contained within the game. Cry of Fear is a very dark and heavy game that covers a range of mature and sometimes shocking topics, and even has its own disclaimer on startup. In order to do the game justice and not compromise on its themes or presentation, we may be discussing aspects of this in full. The game includes depictions and descriptions including self-harm, suicide, severe mental illness, serial killing, self-mutilation, harm to children, and other grotesque and disturbing actions. I'll be describing these things accurately where relevant to my review, but without glorifying them or playing them up for shock factor. With that established, let's get into Cry of Fear. If you've played a Source Engine game, you'll probably feel right at home getting started in Cry of Fear. I spent many years as a teenager playing Half-Life and mods such as Zombie Panic and Insurgency Source, so it immediately felt pretty natural to me. This manifests in some parts of the game that are intuitive if you've played a Source game, but frustrating and confusing if you have not. Perhaps the best example is the requirement to crouch jump to advance essential sequences. Beginning the game, it's understandable if you're not quite sure what's going on. In fact, that may be the case for a very large portion of the game. A melancholy intro cutscene shows our main character, Simon, riding on transit before walking home. On the way, he stops to help a seemingly injured man on the road before being struck by a car. We'll explore the relevance of this later when we get to the heavy spoilers section, but for now it's what we see before we wake up in a house, holding a camera. Dark rooms ahead of you, the flash from the camera illuminates nightmare visions as well as your path forward. Follow these to the game's first very egregious jump scare, and you'll make your way to the start of the actual game. Waking once more, this time in an alley, you know only a couple of things. It's getting dark soon, and you should be going home. These are two constants you can bank on for some time to come. Mechanically, Cry of Fear is a first-person survival horror with heavy action shooter elements. It's got many of the staples you might expect from this genre: limited supplies, puzzles and key item finding, and juggling items with your limited inventory spaces. Combat is pretty typical for a Source Engine game. There are a couple of notable twists here, though. There is a stamina meter which is used for moves like dodging, which can be activated by rapidly tapping a direction twice. Gunplay is relatively straightforward and smooth, and I like that the game allows the use of iron sights. One thing the game doesn't tell you immediately is that it employs a magazine-based reload system, which dumps your entire current magazine when you reload. If you're used to other shooters which incentivize reloading after every encounter, you may find yourself dumping a lot of valuable ammo on the ground. Instead, the move is often to delay reloading, and do so only when you'll need a topped-off magazine to avoid taking damage in the next encounter. Gunplay balance falls more on the side of a survival horror than a straight action shooter. Ammo is usually available in sufficient quantities if you're good at lining up your shots and taking advantage of your melee on weaker or single enemies. However, at times you'll still find yourself running on empty, or swimming only in ammo for a gun you're not currently carrying. Once you start running into enemies who also have guns, it sometimes feels that taking damage is unavoidable, and occasionally this will happen in long stretches without healing items, which can leave you nursing low health and tricky situations for long periods of time. Another big consideration that ties into Cry of Fear's design is the use of light. The game is seriously dark, and often requires the use of a light source to get around it all. Most of the time, this will come in the form of your cell phone light, or another object such as a flare, taking up one of your free hands. While holding this light source, you'll be restricted to whatever weapon you can carry in your offhand, and you'll be less effective with it. You're also not able to reload your handgun while your light is in your other hand. This makes for an interesting calculus for what weapons you can afford to use at any time. If you need a light, you'll have to stick to your handgun or melee weapon, and you've only got enough bullets for so many enemies before you'll need to drop your light to reload. I remember one encounter in a dark sewer with far too many enemies to engage with my Glock alone. Able to see only a few feet in front of me, I switched to my M16 and waited to see the vague outline of the closest enemy. Firing, I was able to use the muzzle flash of the rifle to illuminate my other targets as they got closer. Limited inventory space complicates combat further. For most of the game, you'll have access to 6 item slots. These will store your weapons, your light source, your healing supplies, and key items you'll need for puzzles and progress. Luckily, ammunition does not count against these item slots, meaning you can stack ammo you find for guns even if you can't carry that gun right now, but you'll still find 6 slots fills up quickly. Picking up a key item to progress might mean you need to leave behind the weapon you've been carrying around like a security blanket. Or you might decide to pop that healing syringe you don't really need right now because you simply can't spare the inventory space to carry it with you, so better to get a little use out of it than none at all. Managing the limited supplies you're given is a major component of the game's difficulty, and can also be blamed for occasional difficulty spikes that feel somewhat forced. Early in the game, you'll find syringes given in good number to keep yourself in good health. At several points throughout the game, though, you may find yourself in a save loop with very limited ammo and health, and none provided before an extensive section. I found myself in this situation during a train scene, during which several cars of a train must be traveled while battling enemies to receive a key item. Luckily, I had just enough ammo to get it done if I was very effective with every shot. I had no healing items, and so little health I died in 2 hits. I finessed my way through this area by running back to save each time I successfully cleared a car with no hits. It felt a little like save scumming, but the alternative was having to do a shot-perfect run of pretty good length while taking no damage at all. We've talked about combat some, but not about the variety of enemies you'll encounter. They range from fairly typical horror game enemies to grotesque and disturbing creatures, and have a remarkable variety of behaviors that may not normally be seen in games like this. Many of the enemies are of the typical melee, crawler, shambler, sprinter variety, of which you'll likely be familiar from other action horror games. But there are more beyond this archetype which I feel are worth featuring. I'm grabbing the names from the game's wiki, and I'm not sure how official those are, but it is how the community refers to them, so there will at least be continuity. The so-called sumos are often encountered in dark areas or those flooded with water. Bound in a barbed wire straitjacket, their primary attack is actually to hit with their tongue at range. They will lay in limbo beneath the dark surface of knee-high water, waiting to jump up and surprise the player. The barbed wire can actually be undone after hits with a melee weapon, freeing the arms and increasing the speed and power of the sumo. The drowned are another early enemy which turn combat on its head. Fail to kill them fast enough, and they'll start to control the player with dark thoughts. Resisting their influence is necessary to prevent the player character from shooting themselves, ending the game. The wiki says this has no effect if the player does not have a loaded gun equipped, but I did not extensively test with a melee weapon. Get too close to them, and a baby bursts from their torso, wielding a knife. Not holding too much back, there are also children and baby monsters within Cry of Fear. The children are implied to be the victims of a prolific serial killer who has left many disturbing notes scattered through the apartments of the game for the player to read. Waterlogged, wrapped in garbage bags and duct tape, they're already a disturbing enemy. They are also surprisingly fast and deal vicious dual strikes with their knives. The baby enemies are a different kind of disturbing altogether. Weak and easy to kill, they run at the player to surprise them, bursting forth a spike from their head to stab the player and kill themselves instantly. That's something of a theme with the enemies in the game. The Faster, for instance, seems to plunge its 2-bladed arms into its own eye sockets when it's killed. The gun-wielding Suicider is so named because when Simon approaches too closely, they will turn the gun on themselves instead. One of the more content-warning-worthy enemies in the game are the Hangers, who drop from trees hung by a noose about their necks and scream in the player's face. As is typical for my playstyle, I engaged in a lot of combat as I like clearing enemies out of areas and not having to worry about navigating around them anymore. But some amount of dodging, stealth, and running is possible. The only other big thing to touch on with combat are the boss fights and special enemies scattered throughout the game. There are your typical boss fights in arenas with health bars, bosses that must be killed by interacting with the environment, enemies you can only run from, and enemies which serve as obstacles blocking your progress forward until they are dealt with. Exploration in the game is quasi-linear, restricted to certain areas, but with a lot of those areas folding around and looping back on each other. You will end up covering a lot of the same ground more than once, and sometimes to an extent that feels excessive. It's neat to see a good use of space in game design, getting multiple uses out of the same location and opening up previously locked paths. But other times it feels obstacles are stuck in your way to make you backtrack simply for the purpose of padding out the experience. There's one section in particular involving transporting electrical fuses a great distance multiple times, and I'm sure those who have played know what I'm talking about immediately. Sometimes, advancing in Cry of Fear means finding one little thing you missed to interact with. In one case, I found a ladder and had no idea where I was meant to use the ladder, so I had to wander around looking for anything that seemed I might need a little help to reach. Eventually, I got enough of a hint to find the one window that required the use of the ladder. In another case, I wandered around for some time trying to determine how to get to a new area. It turns out an enemy had jumped through a bus window and broken it, and I was meant to exit that same window. At no point was there a solution I felt was ridiculous or totally impossible to come up with on my own, but at several points I got stuck looking for very specific solutions. While you're wandering around, though, you get to be taken in by the atmosphere of the game. The experience tends to fluctuate between two extremes: the intense, oppressive, overwhelming horror, and the still, serene, pensive beauty of a still night. These two states border each other, and you'll take frequent trips between them. Furthering this experience is the awesome sound design. The soundtrack of this game is beautiful when it needs to be, full of peace and atmosphere. It's the type of thing you could just go night walking to for real. On the flip side, the tense and scary moments of the game are filled with horrible noises that are borderline overstimulating, and I mean this in the most effective way. Cry of Fear knows when to be pretty, still, and serene, and when to be frenetic and unrelenting. Part of the charm of the setting is its realness as a place people would live. I've never been to a European city, or anywhere with a functioning subway system, so some of this doesn't match my lived experience. But it feels like a city some would call home. The parks feel like the kind of place you might visit on a night stroll. And then there's the flip side, the unreality. Without accusing Cry of Fear of borrowing too much from its influences, this part of the game feels very Silent Hill inspired. From the weird ambiance to the rusty, dripping meat texture of walls and floating geometric pathways, distorted nightmare visions, and even the too many locked doors crying that the town has no locksmiths, the resemblance is uncanny. And yet, the darkness and dissolution leads forward into light. I found this most striking towards the game's end. In its final chapter, emerging from the darkness of night to the mottled colors of dawn and birds singing. There are still trials to be faced. You still must make your way home, but you have passed through the darkest part of night, and now may face them in the bare light of day. This plays also into the game mechanics mentioned earlier. With enough light to navigate, you're no longer forced to hold your phone as a crutch. You now have two free hands for all the powerful weapons in the game. As we move into the final segment of our review, now would be a good time for the heavy spoiler warning mentioned earlier. We've kept it light on story elements and big revelations so far, but now we need to talk about a few things. So, major story spoilers incoming. Now would be a fine time to leave the video if you like what you've heard so far and want to experience it fresh for yourself. Cry of Fear is a game with multiple endings, and none of them are necessarily full of bright futures and neat resolutions. But some are certainly better than others, and the standard good ending at least ends on a note of hope for peaceful days ahead. I was lucky to get this ending the first time I played, especially since I almost skipped out on a major requirement for getting it, and only went back to redo that after feeling bad about it. So who is Simon? Why is all of this happening? And what does it all mean? Here's my best attempt at explaining what happens. We talked before about the intro sequence with the car accident, dark house with the camera, and waking up in an alley with a text from our mom to come home. This begins Chapter 1. Obviously, the trip home is full of danger, as Simon is attacked by a variety of grotesque enemies. Simon is unable to get service to call for help, but in addition to the occasional text from his mom, he also receives a text from an unknown number asking for help. Making his way through the apartment, he finds graphic evidence of serial killing and dismemberment, and eventually finds the body of the unknown texter in a bathtub full of blood. In this segment, we also experience his first encounter with the unreality, a distorted version of the world around him. Simon's main focus is always on going home, but everywhere he turns, it seems he's faced with nearly insurmountable horrors. He encounters grotesque bosses and monsters which not only threaten him, but when defeated, sometimes turn their weapons on themselves. He also encounters a doctor in a gas mask who warns Simon that it's not safe to be here, but doesn't immediately feel otherwise friendly or interested in helping. While desperately trying to get home, Simon receives a call, but the signal is so bad he's not able to make out much. He knows only that the caller is on the roof. Going to visit, he finds it's his longtime friend and crush, Sophie. In a weird moment of almost normalcy amidst all that's going on, Sophie and Simon have a bit of time to catch up. Sophie expresses appreciation for Simon, being nice to her in the past in school, and thanks him for making her life a little better. Simon admits his feelings to Sophie, but she ultimately says she doesn't feel quite the same way. She expresses that she called Simon here because she's been thinking about getting away from it all. Before Simon can fully understand what she's implying, Sophie stands and drops off the building in front of him. Then rises the boss, the carcass, and this is the boss I talked about earlier that I almost skipped. You see, this is where the long cutscene followed by boss fight comes in. I died to this boss a couple of times, having to rewatch the cutscene each time, and one time on accident discovered that the game simply allows you to flee from this boss. I did so at first, but had a gut feeling that I may be missing out on something, so I decided to go back and fight it again. Luckily, I found a nice little hiding corner that made it fairly easy. It's a good thing I did, because whether you kill this boss or flee is one of two options throughout the game that decides what ending you achieve. Most of Simon's time at this point is spent solving obstacles to get home via the train and survive his excursions through the nightmare world. He continues to run into the doctor all along the way. The things he sees also cause him to continually question his own sense of sanity and whether any of it is actually real. He also encounters conversations and documents from the perspective of a doctor, talking about a patient and his repetitive activities. Simon eventually gets the train running, and then there's an interesting sequence of events that I feel really ties together the metaphor for the game, particularly the good ending. The train derails and crashes, leaving Simon with a narrow escape and a loss of his items. Starting fresh in the dark forest night, you enter the literal darkest part of the game. But from this dark forest, suffering a great loss, you rebuild, and you enter the mental asylum. You pass through the trials of the asylum, choose to help the doctor by turning over the gun he asks you to retrieve, and the doctor in return shoots you in the shoulder, leaving a permanent wound. You trusted, you helped, and you were wounded for it. But you pass through the asylum to the break of dawn, the chirping of birds. The light is rising and your determination is higher than ever before. You will make it home. The game provides you weapons and you fight your way home where your mother waits. Make your way home and find not mom, but a book. Suddenly you are Simon, wheelchair-bound, reading your book and confronting yourself. Literally. The final boss, at least for the ending I got, is facing the ambulatory version of yourself. Chase Simon through the twisted Unreal corridors, survive his attacks, kill him, and get your good ending. Simon is a man who already struggled with mental issues before an accident that left his spine injured and himself paralyzed. The accident we see in the beginning of the game. The game is largely about Simon's struggles to accept his new life and cope with what he feels he's lost as a result. In the good ending, Simon wrestles with himself and ultimately does not commit suicide. However, in a fit of psychosis, he does kill 2 police officers that enter his house. It's not made abundantly clear, at least to me, what the police officers were doing there at his front door, though it seems possible to me that it could have been a welfare check from someone worried about Simon's state of mind. Whatever the case, Simon's psychosis lands him permanently in a mental hospital, where he can receive the help he needs. He mentions that the nurses and doctors allowed him to write his book, perhaps the book that we played through as the character Simon ourselves. Simon wrote himself a happy ending, one that made him feel better, but I'm not sure it's clear exactly what that ending entailed. Maybe the writing of the book and the processing of all he had lost is the happy ending. Simon states he's surrounded by supportive people, in particular working with Dr. Purnell, who monitors and mentors him, who he's lucky to have. The same Dr. Purnell we followed through the horrible and unreal worlds, and chose to help by turning over the gun. Seems Dr. Purnell was a guiding light for Simon, somebody who helped him get through the trials. I'm not sure what can be drawn of Dr. Purnell shooting Simon in the arm when the handgun is given over. Perhaps it's a representation of the necessary pain and suffering Dr. Purnell must inflict on the real Simon to lead him to a better place. The gunshot wound could also not be a metaphor of something Dr. Purnell inflicted in particular, but an injury mirroring the one Simon has to learn to come to terms with. Sophie also comes to visit, although Simon mentions that the doctors still consider her visits destabilizing. Simon feels bad for the pain he's caused Sophie and apologizes frequently. He mentions she's found a new friend, one that treats her right. He obviously feels some loss at the relationship he wishes he could have had with her, but is happy to still have her in his life. Again, defeating the carcass boss seems to be symbolic of overcoming something in the lives of Simon and Sophie. Even the way the carcass is chair-bound seems to mirror Simon's status in his wheelchair. Simon ends, "I think this is a good time to close this book. It has changed my life forever. The end." And so too ended my playthrough of Cry of Fear. So what impression did it make on me? Cry of Fear was an intriguing experience, a beautiful one, full of heart and vision from the team that worked on it. It's truly hard to believe that an experience like this is available totally free. I feel it holds its own along many professional paid experiences. Horror games don't tend to get to me the way they get to some people. I know that sounds like a humble brag. I tend not to get immersed as far as the fear goes, and instead see a bunch of repeatable pass-fail states which are desirable or undesirable. I like horror not because it makes me scared, but because it has a unique way of expressing the beauty of certain feelings we find difficult to communicate. Cry of Fear, for its part, is one of the more intense horror experiences I've played in some time, and yes, it did get me with a couple of its jump scares. But what I'll always remember about it are not any individual scares, but the vibes, the feelings it left me with, what this piece of art had to say about itself. Is it the best written game I've ever played, or a perfect representation of mental illness and its challenges? Of course not. It's more of an allegory. It's created by a team of individuals, and it shows. But for everything it is, it delivers an experience and a feeling unlike much that I have played before. With the caveat of those who feel the subject matter might be too heavy for them or something they don't want to engage with, I highly recommend people play through Cry of Fear themselves. Mechanically, it's an engaging and interesting game which demands precision, decision-making, and a thoughtful approach. Artistically, it may lean towards the shock side of horror occasionally, but it has plenty to say and make you feel. If you haven't played this game yet, if you have any interest at all in what you've just watched, definitely see it for yourself. Thanks to everybody who's hung with us while I talk about the experience I had with this game. This is a much longer form than what I typically do, so feel free to let me know what you thought about it. Constructive comments, positive or negative, are always welcomed. I plan on talking about a wide variety of games coming up, in addition to what I've already covered on the channel, so if you have an interest in any of that, please consider subscribing to be notified of future videos. Additionally, I stream games and even the process of making these videos, both here on my YouTube channel and on Twitch at twitch.tv/adnoctummedia. If you'd like to be a part of it, hang out with us and chat while we game and work. We'd love to have you. You're also welcome to follow me on Twitter, or join the Discord if you'd like another place to talk games. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about these things I enjoy and experience sharing them with people. Until we see you again, take care of yourselves.